members of council. We will begin our committee hearing in 5 minutes. Please report to chambers. I just came off of old folks stage. Good morning. Good morning. Can we please have quiet in the chambers? Good morning, everyone. We are about to convene the first hearing of the Special Investigation Committee on Demolition Practices in the City of Philadelphia. I am thankful and for the appointment of this committee by our president of this body, Council President Clark. Joining me on this committee are, to my left, Councilwoman Sanchez, Councilman Heenan, to my right, Councilman Kenny, and we should be joined briefly in a few minutes by Councilwoman Blackwell. I am particularly, and I have Councilman O'Brien who has joined us. I'm particularly pleased at the composition of this committee. We have people who have had long history in demolition and development and construction and labor practices in the city of Philadelphia as members of this committee. We have Vice Chair Heenan, who is Vice Chair of Public Safety. I have Councilman Kenny, who introduced crane legislation and helped to improve safety for our high-rise construction. I'm joined by Councilwoman and Chair of L&I, Councilwoman Sanchez, who has a strong passion for keeping us safe. So we are looking forward to these public hearings, and what we hope to do is to have a thoughtful process to evaluate the current state of demolition practices in the city of Philadelphia. We hope to learn where we are, and then to, in separate hearings, look at, quote, best practices, and to see if indeed there is a difference between our current process and where we need to be professionally to keep citizens safer in the city of Philadelphia. Let me say what we will not do. We will not point blame. We will take facts, and we will create good public policy that may result in legislation or appropriations where appropriate to departments to help safeguard citizens in the city of Philadelphia. To do that, we will have the following. We will have approximately four hearings, one today dealing with city administrations and departments. We will have a best practices group, and if you are interested in joining the expert witness list, you should contact Stacy Graham in my office to add your names. But also we are going to have public comment at the end of the hearing sessions. So there won't be a lot of back and forth from the public until such time as we've had an opportunity to develop a record, a public record, and then get the best of the thinking of the public. And what we hope to do over the course of the summer is conclude with a document of recommended courses of action. We do this in cooperation with the administration, and I want to say that for the record, that we have met with them privately, and they are willing and able to provide constructive comment to this process, and we're looking forward for the benefit of all Philadelphia stakeholders, and in particular their citizens. There is an expectation. Public safety means different things to different people. I've said that on a number of occasions. But it also means that someone shopping should have the expectation that they can safely do so without a calamity that took 7 lives from us, and our prayers and our thoughts go out to both the victims that perished and the survivors that need to rehab. So with that, I'd like the clerk to read the title of the bill.
Bill number 130546, a resolution authorizing the creation of a special investigating committee on demolition practices in the city of Philadelphia to investigate safety problems and identify solutions related to the oversight of demolition projects in the city, and in furtherance of such investigation, establish public policy.
Would any of the members like to have an opening statement on the committee? Sure. Councilman? Chair recognizes Councilman Heenan.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Thank you, Chairman, members of the committee. You know, as you well know, I've been in the construction industry throughout my entire adult life, and probably the only person in this body who has actually worked on a job site. You know, I know the tricks of the trade, and I know how the industry works. And, you know, today we're going to, you know, including myself, we're going to be asking a lot of questions, you know, on the process. And I'm not just saying that as a council person, as a member of this committee, but as somebody who has friends and family who's worked on these job sites personally, and how it affects me. L&I is one of our core services here in the city of Philadelphia. They are on the first line of defense, I believe, when it comes to public safety and ensuring that, you know, we are doing what we can to make sure that our regulations and the laws that we have in place and ordinances reflect so. So I want to thank Council President Clark and the Chairman for commissioning this committee so we can get down to the processes to see what works and see what doesn't work and have a better understanding about our first line, again, of defense when it comes to public safety and ensuring the public's best interest. So I look forward to this committee and tangible results at the end of this, because I believe you have the interest of the entire city as we want to have responsible development and public safety first at hand. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilman. Any other comments from members of the committee? Seeing none, will the clerk please announce the first witness group?
Commissioner Carlton Williams, Deputy Mayor Everett Gillison.
Thank you, gentlemen. Good morning.
Good morning.
Please state your names for the record, all those at the table, and please begin your testimony.
Thank you. And good morning, Chairperson Jones, also members of the Special Investigation Committee. My name is Everett Gillison. I am the Chief of Staff to Mayor Nutter, as well as the Deputy Mayor for Public Safety. With me is Carlton Williams, Commissioner of License and Inspection, and also to my right, Andrew Ross from the Law Department. We don't have any prepared testimony, as we have had a good opportunity, I believe, and I will echo the commitment that was made earlier on. We received the notice from you, Chairman, last Friday, and we immediately set about to provide as much detail and much answers to particular documents that you requested. The mayor has asked me to make sure that I spearhead this on behalf of the administration in my Chief of Staff role. And so we are here to answer questions. I also was able to give you a letter from the City Solicitor's Office that talked about the parameters, which I think are the same things that we're trying to get done. We want to make sure that we do things in a good way, that we're responsive, and we look forward to the product of this special committee's recommendations. As you know, the mayor has, and there are other investigations that are going on, and all of those are towards the eye of getting to the best that we can for the citizens of Philadelphia. And it's in that spirit that we not only appear, but that we will be answering questions that you may have. If there are questions that we will not be able to, because we're obviously at the beginning of this, obviously we will decline to answer, just given the fact that we're all in the middle of or at the beginning of various investigations, and I will handle that. But I assure you that we will do this together, and we will work towards the best answers that we can. So with that, if the committee has a question, be glad to answer.
Are any other witnesses? Would you like to say anything, Commissioner?
I just want to echo the comments of Chief of Staff Gillison that we are looking forward to working with the committee to come up with best practices to try to prevent tragedies like this from occurring in the future.
Thank you so much for your cooperation. We look forward to the end product. So with that, could you, for the record, state how long you've been L&I Commissioner?
June 4th, 2012. It's been approximately 1 year, sir.
And prior to that, where were you?
I was the Deputy Commissioner for the Streets Department for 7 years.
And if you would, for those of us who are not, unlike my colleague, necessarily in the demolition construction industry, could you describe, first, I would think, your department and the organization chart, who reports to what, and leading down to specific people who are responsible for demolition, just to give us a sense of the structure in your department.
Sure. As a commissioner, I oversee the Department of License and Inspection. Our primary responsibility is to enforce the building codes that's been established by the International Building Code and the city's administrative code. Our responsibilities in terms of what we do for the city of Philadelphia is to inspect buildings to ensure public safety. We have 3 divisions that report to me. One is a deputy commissioner for administration who oversees the budget. The other 2 divisions is the deputy commissioner of development, who oversees permit and licensing services and also oversees the construction inspection process. The final division is the deputy commissioner of operations, who oversees property maintenance issues related to private and personal properties.
Of that, how many of those individuals are responsible for particularly demolition? And when I say demolition, could you define the various categories of demolition?
Sure. There's 2 forms of demolition that we're directly responsible for, public and private demolitions. Private demolition is of course, when a contractor initiates a building permit to either demolish a building for a reconstruction project or a future development project, or demolish the building for a vacant lot for future development use. In addition to that, for public demolitions, we directly oversee public demolitions in regards to eminently dangerous buildings. When we get calls from residents or when we are out on our details, if there's an eminently dangerous situation or an eminently dangerous property, then we are authorized to take action. And we try to do that through what we call a contractor services unit, who oversees the demolition process for private contractors to perform city demolitions.
Who oversees public demolition in your department?
Our contractor services unit.
And who is that individual?
Deputy Commissioner Michael Maynor, assisted by Otis Hagler, who's the director of the program.
And who oversees private demolition?
Deputy Commissioner Michael Fink, in regards to various districts that throughout, as you saw on that organizational chart, depending on where the demolition is expected to occur. Also, we have a director of permit services that issues the permit for any building permit services project, including demolitions.
Is there a difference in what is your total number of personnel within the department?
Are you asking, can you clarify for this year's budget or for fiscal year 2014?
Let's go with both this year and what is requested.
This year was 300 employees, and next year we had an increase of 320 to 320, which would require 20 additional inspectors, as you know.
Is that up or down from the previous year?
That is the 300 inspectors.
I understand next year's is up.
Yes, next year's up.
This year's is lower.
Right.
What was it the year before?
Could you give me a second? I would be happy to get you that information. It's up. It went from 290 to 300.
Okay. Say it again. for the record?
It went from 290 to 300 from
Okay, so that's an
2011 to
increase.
2012. Yes, correct.
As it relates to public demolition, what is the complement of employees in the public demolition department?
We have 10 CSU inspectors directly
Can you
responsible.
say what a CSU?
Yeah, Contractor Service Unit.
Okay.
Who oversees the demolition of private contractors performing city demolitions.
Now, I think I asked how many are in the public?
That's for public.
Public, that's 10.
Yes.
And how many are in the private?
Again, it varies because that is done in cooperation with other building permits throughout the city, not just for demolition. So it will be encompasses of all 43 building inspectors who do multiple inspections, not just for demolition.
So there's no clear number, there's a clear number for public. Why is there not a clear number for private?
Demolitions are considered a part of the building permit process and is inspected by our plan examiners and our construction specialists that are assigned other responsibilities as well in the building process.
Okay. Are there any questions related to the organizational chart from members of the committee? No? Seeing none? Can we go to the process chart? Oh, I'm sorry. Recognizing Councilwoman Brown, who is in the audience, in the chambers, as well as Councilwoman Blackwell, who's on the committee, has joined us, and I see Councilwoman Bass is also here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning.
I want to step back and do a little bit of context here, so I have two questions. One, having looked at other cities across the country who do what this government does, what cities do you believe have best practices when it comes to the work of L&I?
All right, wait a minute, Councilwoman, we have we're going to ask that in a different
Setting.
Yeah, and so we will put a pin in that one and recognize that at the appropriate time.
No problem.
We're trying to have a methodology
Okay.
to get through this because there's so many questions. So we kind of broke it up, the committee did. We're going to go into the process and then best
Okay.
practice. That is
Very
actually
well.
something we are going to look at.
Okay, so then to this chart.
Yeah.
How has this chart changed from previous administration? Has there been a change in the configuration in the table of organization of L&I?
I think the structure has basically remained the same. There's fluctuations in the number of employees for other exterior reasons, but the structure has remained pretty much intact over the years.
Where does L&I currently sit in the government? Who does L&I report to?
We report to the Deputy Mayor of Commerce, Mr. Alan Greenberger.
And where was the L&I prior to that department reporting to Deputy Mayor?
I believe that there was a different structure from the previous administration in which the commissioner reported to the managing director.
And can either one of you share with us the rationale or thinking behind moving L&I from reporting to the managing director's office to reporting to the Deputy Mayor for Commerce?
I'll take that one, and because I want to make sure that everyone understands. The deputy mayor structure that the Nutter administration came in essence took the managing director's powers and divided them among the deputy mayor. So in essence, what you have is more supervisions, and instead of reporting to one person, we have 5 deputy mayors. All of us have responsibility for individual sections. Deputy Mayor Alan Greenberger has and picked up L&I, but I can tell you as Deputy Mayor for Public Safety, I also had, at different times, I interact with L&I, but the reporting structure is still to a managing director / deputy mayor. Okay. It's a title change and an increase in supervision, since the mayor believed that having additional people to help out with the structure would be a better responsive way to get change in government rather than leaving it to one individual as known as the managing director. So
in essence, you're saying the reason was to have multiple reporting lines versus one straight reporting line to one professional in government. We wanted to give more supervision by having less oversight. Instead of one person having oversight over
200 things.
Okay.
You have 6 parties who take a different part, so each of us have direct and more direct information and reporting to one. For example, in my deputate, I have the police commissioner, I have the prisons commissioner, I have the fire commissioner, and I meet with them on a daily, sometimes daily, but usually monthly basis. Instead of having one person being responsible for 20 commissioners, you have one person being responsible for 6 commissioners. So we get more information out of the departments rather than less.
And so the deputy mayor for commerce has how many departments reporting to?
Alan, how many do you have? He has 4 line agencies and 6 planning agencies that come under his purview. And I can give you the org chart. I can make sure that you have that, and I can provide it to the chair if you'd like it.
Of those, how many are operating departments, however?
4 of the main operating are under Deputy Mayor
Commerce.
Greenberger.
Okay.
Okay? I can give you the org chart, and I'll make sure you get that before the end of the day.
Well, that would be appreciated. The only, it's not a concern, but I wanted to get an understanding of why from managing director to commerce, when commerce has, where the mission statement or whatever is totally different. It deals with generating business activity and the like for the city, and that I'm trying to help understand why commerce, why L&I, which is the operating department, has a totally different set of functions and responsibilities would fit under commerce.
Because under his title includes development. So
Okay.
development, it's economic development as well. So development is where L&I has a crucial role in putting together a developmental responsibility. That doesn't do anything by way of diminishing L&I's role as a safety matter.
Okay.
It is just in enhancing and making sure we have a central way to go with development. But again, all of us as deputy mayors are also basically, in essence, managing directors of our offices. We have line authority and line responsibility as the managing director for public safety.
Okay.
As I've told people, sometimes we get a little bit into the title, but it's the responsibility that goes with our titles that really is important. So we have 5 deputy mayors or 5, in essence, managing directors to deal with the responsibilities of a 21st century government. Okay. But I'll give you that.
Please, if you would submit that to the chair, that would be helpful.
Not a problem, Councilwoman.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilwoman. So we looked at the organizational chart. We noted for the record that it has changed from the prior administration. The Chief of Staff gave us the rationale for that. Can you now explain the building permit process and help us through this labyrinth of decisions here?
Well, and I'll try to be as direct as possible.
Take your time.
Because a lot of it is related to extensive construction projects. There's no difference. But specifically regarding demolition, many of the concepts that you see up on the graph don't apply to demolition permit applications. It started at its earliest form when someone arrives to the concourse to apply for a building permit. The applicant determines if we have a drop-off procedure to do a plan review, which one is not required under the old regulations for demolition projects. The intake staff gets the application information and assigns them an application number. If there are plans which under the old system was not required for the application, it then moves.
When we are dealing with something that prior regulations covered, slow down and tell us, under prior regulations, this is how we did it. Right. And now with the adjustments to, and tell us clearly, this is how we used to, this is how we're going to.
You got it.
All right.
And I'm speaking specifically under prior regulations,
Okay.
and we can talk about current regulations
All right.
once I'm concluded. The application then is submitted to the permit to see if to the permit issuance unit and the permit is issued over the counter. Applicant is advised on what information is required for their permit process, and they pay an appropriate building permit fee, and the permit is then issued. And I'm specifically speaking for pre-regulation demolition permit. The other items that you see in the middle of the chart specifically relate to plan reviews, which are extensive to major construction projects for the city of Philadelphia, both commercial and residential building development projects. And so we do extensive plan reviews with what is to be looked at, reviewed, and approved prior to issuing any building permit. There's an accelerated fee program in which a building permit can be issued much faster for timeliness of the contractor or the developer who is applying for the specific permit. But in a nutshell, that's what the process entails.
Chair recognizes Councilman Kenny.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Commissioner. How does L&I know when a company presents themselves to the counter for a demolition permit across the counter that the company is a legitimate company, that it's current in its taxes, that it has payroll accounts for its employees with the Department of Revenue, that the company is a legitimate, upstanding company that does business in the city on a regular basis? Or is it given across the desk just because they have a business activity license?
The process requires that they have a commercial activity license, a contractor's license, they have tax clearance from the Department of Revenue, and ultimately pay the fee for approval of the permit process.
How do you determine the tax clearance?
That's the Department of Revenue provides a clearance form for the department to accept during the application.
And is that document provided by the applicant, or is it provided by the Department of Revenue?
It's provided by the Department of Revenue to the applicant who submits it to us.
And every demolition permit or building permit, in every single case, has that documentation been provided in the last year or 2 years?
That information, and I will have to get back to you for all demolition projects, but the answer is yes, it's supposed to be, and I will make sure that we get that information to you to clarify if all demolition projects accompany that. But the answer is yes, they're supposed to have
What
all of the
happens when
permits.
an individual presents themselves as a representative of a developer or demolition company that has credentials or a license that enables them to request a permit for demolition or construction, but is not exactly the individual that will be doing the work?
I believe that
AKA an expediter.
Right.
How do we
I
know
believe
that
that you were referring to the role of an expediter.
Right.
An expediter who is acting on behalf of a general contractor must obtain an expediter's license.
Right.
They also must have the same information that a contractor has, and they have to have a commercial activity license. They have to have a city tax ID number. They have to have proof of insurance coverage, in which I failed to mention that a contractor also is expected to have upon presentation or application of a building permit as well. And there is a criminal search on the background for any fraudulent activity that an expediter may have been into.
Okay. How do we know or keep track of a situation where an expediter legally obtains a permit for demolition or construction, but then turns that permit over to a company that we're not aware of what their background or tax status or employee status is?
The expediter is expected to provide the contractor's information, the same as if a contractor showed up in person to apply for that permit with the same procedures that I mentioned earlier.
Now, when an inspector goes to the site of a demolition project or a construction project a permit was obtained by a third party, how do they determine on site who's doing the work?
Through the posting of the permit is expected to demonstrate who's responsible, the responsible contractor for the project in hand. So that's the first thing an inspector looks for during initial inspection.
And does the inspector at some point in time interact with the Revenue Department to determine the existence, for example, of payroll accounts, wage tax accounts
No.
for the individuals who are actually working on the site?
No, they do not.
So at some point in time, even if we believe we're giving a permit to a person who is qualified to obtain it, be it an expediter or be it a contractor, at some point in time, we don't have the ability to determine who's actually on the site doing the work.
Well, what's required during the permit process also is that the contractor has to list all of either their employees or subs during the time of permit issuance. And if they're claiming that they're doing the work themselves, they send a notified letter, certified letter that's notarized to the department stating that they're the sole contractor for that site. That's how our permit services division determines.
What happens in the event that an inspector arrives on a construction or demolition site and cannot determine or determines that the people who are on the site are not the people on the permit application?
Under our previous regulations, it was not something that an inspector would take action. Under our current regulations, that's something that we are addressing.
And again, let me just say for the outset that you've been there a year or less than a year. I think you're probably one of the more responsive commissioners that I've had the pleasure to deal with.
Thank you.
I can't say the same about your predecessor, but I will tell you that you are a person who I can call on a Sunday morning and get response from. So I really would like you to answer the questions based on our previous regulations, not the regulations relative to the executive order, because I think that's what we're trying to get our arms around, is what didn't happen or should have happened or could have happened in the past. We recognize and appreciate the executive order, and we hope that our process will enhance the executive order and then codify the things in the executive order, the things that we discover here. So I need you to, if you can, talk about what happened before as opposed to what's happening since a week or so ago.
Understood, sir.
Okay? All right. And I'll relinquish my questions right now for anyone else, so I would like to come back. Thank you.
Because I want to make sure that I'm clear as well, because obviously we're all trying to make sure we understand the processes as they were before. We're going to be describing the processes that we're going before. I want to be responsive to that. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Sanchez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to talk about the demo permit application process. And were there any departmental regulations or other written standards that provided guidance as to when a permit request was received, if there were any need for supplemental documents, engineering plans? Was there a checkoff list when people came in? Was there something written that the staff had? Or was there something written that was given as an expectation to the person who was receiving the permit?
Outside of the building permit, no.
Was there, and this is again before the regs, was there any difference in terms of the method for the prescribed method for demolition based on the size of the permit being requested?
Are you relating to the fees, please? Could you please clarify?
More than just fee structure. If I am doing if I'm asking for a residential demo, was there a standard and expectation that was given to me with the permit? Was that different than when a commercial, large-size demolition request was issued?
Based on the code, no.
Was there a requirement of, as part of the permit request, for a safety plan, a pedestrian plan? Who made the determination to what supplemental documents were requested?
Again, based on the code, there was no documents required affecting that.
There were no specified procedures or protocols. Was there any informal processes that people generated with experience? You know, one of the things that I appreciate about our staff, in particular the L&I staff, is after a while you get into a rhythm. Was there any practice that was established when a review of a permit was done?
I think it's difficult to answer, Councilwoman. I will say we have some of the best trained inspectors in the city of Philadelphia. They are trained to identify hazards, but if you're asking specifically, was there any written procedure based on the code, the answer is no.
In the training required, I do agree with you, we have very good professionals. In the training required or provided to our staff. Were these items discussed? And if so, at least in your terms, in your year that you've been here, was the practices and procedures ever discussed?
Our inspectors were trained based according to what the code requires.
Okay. In the trainings for staff, how are these situations articulated or discussed as part of the training?
Again, all of the trainings are related to how the code is supposed to be enforced.
Okay. Was there any, or was there any checkoff list, on-site checkoff list? You've mentioned what Councilman Kenny asked, that people look for the permit, the posting of the permit that lists the responsible party. Was there a prescribed checklist on site for inspectors?
There's a building inspection report, but based on the code, again, the answer is no, there's no prescribed checkoff list.
Was there any, when people request a permit from us, do we share the code with them at all? Is there any document that's given to someone along with their permit? Many times when we issue stuff, on the back there's information around expectations, standards, or anything. None of that is in our documents?
Ultimately, it's the contractor's responsibility that's applying for the permit to understand what is required based on the administrative code and the building codes that are established. There are general information in regards to what is required, but the answer is it's ultimately up to the contractor to understand what the permit is ultimately applying for.
Okay. You mentioned to Councilman Kenny that there is a criminal check. Can you workflow that for me? You said that there's a commercial activity check off that's done, a tax clearance, an insurance coverage, and a criminal check.
That's done just for the expediter who's applying, and is done to check for fraud.
And that is updated how many times?
I don't have that information, Councilwoman. I'll have to provide that back to you.
Is there any procedure by which any of those checkoffs are done with the general contractors?
No.
Okay. I will cede the rest of my time to Councilman Heenan.
Thank you, Councilwoman. The chair recognizes Councilman Heenan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner,
Sir.
I just want to echo what Councilman Kenny has said, in your short period of time, and in my short period of time being in office, it has been a pleasure working with you and your senior staff and some of the same concerns and interests regarding public safety and codes and regulations with L&I. So I look forward to, continuing that as we go and move forward, and go through this process. Want to follow up a little bit on what Councilman Kenny had mentioned. So when it comes to workers on a job site, I understand, an inspector comes out, we're supposed to have postings of the general contractor, and the subcontractors by law should be posted. What kind of workers should be on the job site? Is it either a licensed contractor and or an employee of a licensed contractor? Is that correct?
Correct.
Or are there any other recognized workers that should be on a job site?
If there's a subcontractor, it should be licensed as well for the general contractor.
Okay, so everybody on a job site should be either a licensed contractor or an employee of a licensed contractor. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, great. When it comes to permits, construction permits, demolition permits, the cost of a permit, they vary, I guess, how do they vary?
It's based on the square footage of the job and the type of project that they're engaging in. For demolition construction projects, it's $10 every 100 square foot, up to a max of $25,000.
Okay, so in the case of a demolition permit, based on that formula, that calculation, is that the total cost of the job, including workers on the job site and material per per 100 square foot?
I don't know what,
So if there's a value on a permit, is that the total cost of the
from my understanding, it's just based on square footage.
So that's not square footage, does that include materials, labor, safety precautions, additional permits, fencing, or anything like that?
It's just based on square footage. The formula doesn't. I don't believe it takes those things into consideration. It's based on the square footage of the job.
Okay. So we have in the permit, manager, the chart that you said on the process of the permits. You have the permit control construction division. What is the timeline between an applicant applies for a permit and the department's processes of cross-checking, whether they're tax compliant, whether they have bona fide employees, whether a licensed contractor, and so forth, the checklist that you internally do for the permit review?
If all of the required documentation is provided, it's an over-the-counter permit.
It's an over-the-counter permit.
Yes.
So I come in, I get a permit, I go to the MSB building, I provide them a contractor's license. Is there somebody assigned from revenue to L&I on a full-time basis to check whether somebody is in tax compliance or not?
I don't know that, sir. We would have to talk to the revenue department for that.
Okay. Does the department, specifically the Department of L&I, would there be anything on a permit, that would cause or raise red flags to further investigate any kind of anything that you need to further take a look at? So if you had a sole proprietor, right, who comes in, applies for a permit, and this is construction and demolition, this is general question. You have a sole proprietor who comes in and he applies for a permit over the counter, and he's a frequent permit puller. This individual pulls hundreds, per year, and he's a sole proprietor. Would that raise a red flag within the department?
If there were issues with tax compliance, I don't know the specific person, which is why I referred that comment to revenue that's responsible, but revenue does provide us with data and information if someone isn't tax compliant, and then we can take action based on the information that we receive from the revenue department. But I don't know who that specific person was, but that would raise a red flag and for us to take action for a person who is not compliant with a permit application.
Right, and I think, throughout this process, we'll have revenue in, so we can ask some further questions to them in their responsibilities. Does L&I audit contractors or licensees, or is it the responsibility of revenue?
Depending on the area of audit, if it's a revenue or tax collection issue, then obviously the Department of Revenue would take those steps. If it's an issue regarding their license, whether it's up to date, and we would know that beforehand, then we would take those actions to audit the contract.
You perform audits on a random basis, or is it a complaint?
Both. We do both. We get it from random from complaints, and we also do it internally within our department.
Okay.
Thank you,
I'll come back in
Councilman.
a second.
Just real quick before we recognize Councilwoman Blackwell, Councilman Kenny, and then Bass. How do you, on public jobs, how do you determine difficulty levels?
How do we determine?
Who determines difficulty factors in a demolition?
You're referring to our master demolition program.
And so they go out and do what?
Well, primarily, there is a different process for the private demolition projects versus a public demolition project, because we, again, serve as the project manager of our own demo projects. And so in order for someone to get qualified to be on our list, there's a whole set of requirements that they have to follow.
So why is there a difference between public and private, other than the fact that you're the job holder? So why do you hold yourself to that standard?
I think you just echoed it, Councilman. We're the actual job holder. The contractor is the job holder of a private demolition site.
And so describe for me how you assess the difficulty factor in a demolition. I know you did a old hotel for us on, I think it was Lansdowne Avenue. It was eminently dangerous, but how does one go out on a case like that and say, this is a difficulty factor of 1 versus this is a difficulty factor of 10? What are those assessments?
Well, the master demolition specifications require us to go through an extensive process to hire qualified contractors, and we expect them to be able to provide the services based on the difficulty of the job after going through that entire process that's reviewed by both our procurement department law and our staff members as well. So the people that we have on site through the application process approve the number of contractors that's on the demolition list, and they're expected to be able to perform the duties as such.
So I guess what I'm asking, does your department take the responsibility initially of saying, this building's 3 stories high, has a difficulty factor of X, and this is what we expect? Who does, the contractor, or do you or your department employees determine that?
Our contractual services unit does an assessment of
So your employee
correct.
goes out on curbside or to the site and says, this is how much we think this should cost, this is how high, how difficult it is. So it is first determined, I guess, by your department, and then you deal with reputable folks.
It's done through the lowest responsible bidder.
And responsible is the key word.
Correct. So when we're on site, contractors bid on the job that we need to address. And once that occurs, the lowest responsible bidder is selected based on what they submit to our department.
So in a case like the 3-story, 4-story hotel you tore down, did you determine a difficulty factor was occupancy next door? Is that a factor?
Yes, but and again, for clarity purposes, that's a factor that we work directly with the awarded contractor to ensure those things are recognized.
Your staffer says, this is a structure that's going down, let's say it's difficulty factor of 5. At what delineation point do you say we need to vacate the folk next door, or is that a consideration ever?
Those things are discussed again at with the awarded contractor to determine what dangers exist and what steps are we going to take to mitigate any disasters from occurring.
So at what level do you say vacate next door?
It depends on, again, the job in itself.
Give me an example. How do you make that call?
Well, again, we determine and do an assessment of the site.
So tell me what factors at the site would warrant you saying we might want to vacate this.
Once again, it's very difficult to give you that answer. If an imminently dangerous building is about to collapse, then we notify the residents right away to vacate the premises. And we do it within a 3-hour emergency curbside bid to let people know of an impending imminently dangerous situation.
So in a case where it is not imminently dangerous, but needs to come down nonetheless, how do you determine when you should, just in your professional opinion, where is the mark that you currently have or will have in the future that says, we want to require vacant property next door when we take this down?
The contractor who's trained makes that determination in our unit.
So is that a collaboration with your department and
Yes.
the contractor?
That's correct.
Okay. I will yield to now Councilwoman Janie Blackwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Did we, during NTI, when they were doing activities in bulk, did they have training for L&I operators? Any special training?
I can look into that. I know that there was a training provided. L&I's involvement, I have to the extent of involvement, I have to get back to you on that, Councilwoman.
Thank you. That was a suggestion, maybe that we required that no matter whether they're licensed or unlicensed. Maybe that would be one suggestion we can consider.
Yes, ma'am.
And we appreciate the job you do, Commissioner.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Chair recognizes Councilman Kenny and Bass. And also we have joining us Councilman Kenyatta Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner, how many permit applications were filed for, how many demolition permit applications were filed for in 2012 and 13 combined?
If you give me 1 second, I can get it. It's 2,905 applications that were filed.
Combined for the 2 years? For 2013
For
so
12
far,
and 13, no, let me get you that
Okay.
that number. And that was over a 4-year. I'm sorry, Councilman. I wanted to give you that number over a 4-year term. Combined, it was 751 in 2012, and in 2013 to date, it was 385.
In the past, why have private demolitions and public demolition permits been considered differently?
Could you repeat the question? I'm sorry.
In the past practice, why are private demolitions and public demolitions viewed differently? Why are they treated differently?
I think the main difference is that private demolitions are the responsibility of the contractor for whatever the required job is, and public demolitions are acts that we initiated. Right. And we take responsibility for based on an eminently dangerous situation.
And in the public demolition area, we take extra precaution relative to public safety.
Absolutely.
Why wouldn't we apply the same standard to a private demolition that's being done in the public right away?
Again, it's the responsibility of the contractor.
I got that, but it's our responsibility at some point when we issue a permit to ensure that the private contractor doing a private demolition is doing it safely.
Well, there are a number of inspections that were done, preliminary, to ensure that occurs. Again,
but to our own admission here, we do treat, whether it's NTI or whether it's public demolitions currently, we treat those demolitions with a higher standard, apparently a higher standard of safety than we treat the private demolitions.
If I may, Councilman, I think that the question is really, we're responsible as project manager for the ones that we do, and contractors that do this privately are responsible to the same safety standards, but they're responsible for operating things along the way. Just because we give someone a permit does not make us responsible. They are the ones responsible for handling their issue.
But do you believe in some way the issuance of a permit is permission to conduct work in the public space, or we wouldn't have to issue a permit at all?
No, I agree. We have to make sure that, and the permitting process allows us to regulate the issuance of the permit, but the issuance of the permit to the private only says that you now have the right to do this work. But the standards they have to actually come up to on their own, they're the same standards that we have to deal with on our own. We just don't dictate to them or what it is. They still have to deal with the same standard. It's just that we're not responsible for them doing what they do.
But who ensures that they live up to those standards? Since we're the party issuing the permit.
The insurance aspect is actually part of the cost of their doing business. The insurance aspect and the risk is something that's built into their model. All of that is part and parcel of what happens in business across the board. I mean, so.
But if the company that we're issuing a permit to has not complied with the basic financial requirements of owning a company and conducting a company's business, what makes us think that they would comply with required insurance requirements.
The question of whether or not how you evaluate the private versus public, I think that we have to stand on the difference being one we own, the other another owns, and while the standards are the same and the goals are the same to make sure that the public is safe, who takes that responsibility on in the private sector versus when we are the project manager is just the way that we have traditionally done things. Now, obviously, we have now changed that opinion but it doesn't change the risk nor the standard. They are still responsible in the private for everything that happens on private when they're doing this stuff. The public does not have any liability nor any responsibility for that other than trying to make sure that they comply with what they're trying to get done.
And again, not to go anywhere near the subject.
And I'm not.
Not go anywhere near that subject.
That's
the
right.
Liability issues will be determined by another party other than us.
That's exactly right. And that's why I'm not, I'm just making clear the responsibility is where the responsibility lies. It does not change because we issue whether it's a $100 permit or a $500 permit.
Right. Of the combined demolition permit applications filed in the both years we were recently discussing, how many asbestos inspection reports were attached to those demolition permit applications?
I'll have to get that for you, Councilman. I'll provide that to the committee.
In every case, does
asbestos?
Asbestos removal applications must be attached to the permit or the permit's not issued?
I certainly will confirm those numbers for you.
What I also need to know is were there any demolition permit applications rejected for failure to attach an asbestos inspection report?
We'll provide that to the chair as well.
Or were there any approved without an inspection report?
I will provide that to the chair.
Okay. Is an LNI employee who approved the demolition permit application required to read the asbestos inspection report that is provided? I mean, is there someone who reviews the asbestos inspection report?
All of that is required during the permit application process, so the inspector would not review that, no.
Okay. Does the city employ any licensed asbestos investigators?
Again, I don't know. It's usually overseen by the health department, so I will have to find out from health.
So does the health department review demolition permits for the existence and qualifications of an asbestos inspection report?
I don't know. I will find that information out for you.
Okay. Are the individuals who review demolition permits generally knowledgeable of asbestos inspection or asbestos removal?
They're aware of the code that it's required.
And they ensure that the individual contractor who's asking for the demolition permit is knowledgeable of asbestos inspection?
Could you clarify? I'm sorry. Repeat the question.
Do we review the qualifications of the contractor who's requesting the permit, that they are in fact knowledgeable of the hazards and needs to remove asbestos in a safe manner?
They provide the report, so no one reviews it.
And I would suspect that you would agree that the demolition of a building without the proper asbestos removal or removal protection is a bad thing for us to allow in the city.
That's correct.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. I'm going to recognize Councilwoman Bass.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have a really brief question, a couple of brief questions. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
And really quick, I'm just curious as to, Commissioner, I know you have not been the commissioner for a very long time. How long would you say you've been commissioner? How long have you been commissioner?
A year. It's a year, Councilman.
1 year?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And prior to that, the commissioner served for how long?
Excuse me.
Do you know the term of or how long the previous commissioner?
Fran was there for...
Fran?
Fran was there for 4 years?
For 4 years.
4 years. She was there. Commissioner Fran Burns was there for 4 years.
Okay. And do we expect to hear from former Commissioner Burns also, or from, I guess, any other former L&I commissioners?
That's up to the chair, I guess.
Councilwoman, that's an interesting question, and we will, as a committee, deliberate and see if we can't
Okay.
get some juxtaposition and other ideas from other sources,
Okay.
including former commissioners.
Right, thank you. I just think it's important as we look over the history of L&I that we, talk to some folks, particularly those who have been there for a considerable amount of time, and former commissioners who, particularly Commissioner Burns and her predecessor, about some of these issues as well, because of the history of L&I. So I just wanted to...
Makes sense, Councilwoman. We will look into it.
Thank you.
The Chair recognizes Councilman Heenan.
Thank you, Chairman. I know some of the questions may seem a little repetitive, but again, I'm going to ask, because I was a little bit unclear, the value on the permits, aside from the calculation, they're given over the counter. Who checks the actual, who cross-checks quality control for the proper amount financially for the permit given on the job? So if a permit comes in, if it's, somebody puts down there $5,000, and indeed the job total is $200,000, whose responsibility would it be to check the value of the permit to make sure that it's...
I just want to make sure...
It's not falsely reported.
Right. I just want to make sure that I'm clear on the question, because, as the commissioners indicated, this is a simple square footage application that the way the code has been written. So a building would be reported at 5,000 square feet, and then there would be a documentation of how much that would actually come to. It's really not the value of the job that's at issue here, at least not previously. Now, that's something that perhaps the committee might want to consider, or we might be considering going forward. But as it is right now and by code, it literally is just a math issue. I think that someone's probably just making sure the math is right. It's a 5,000 square foot building. It's a 250 square foot building, time the applicable number for the value of the permit. That's all the way it was per code for quite a long time, and I think that goes back almost 50 or 60 years.
Okay, well, I'd be interested in, again, this is more for clarity.
No.
And, there's some unscrupulous contractors and individuals out there who falsify permits and other documentation on a regular basis. So, I'm just trying to get clarity on my end so I can,
Right.
as we move forward as a committee. It's based on demolition. It's based on square footage, which I understand. I read the code. I understand that. Is that the only dollar value for a permit in demolition?
I believe so.
Yes, I believe so.
Yes.
Okay. And in construction, I have concerns in construction as well about permits being pulled with undervalued, reporting on that. So as we move forward and we go through this process in general, I'd like to continue on that question. I have some other questions, I'm sure, Commissioner, that you would have to, I'm going to ask that we can provide to the chair moving forward. Permits denied. Can you provide to the chair how many permits were denied over the last 2 years, and for what reasons? How many were denied in demolition and in construction? 2, how many audits were performed in, from the Department of L&I, broken down to categories, whether it's demolition and construction? And have there been any revocations of any permits or licenses or suspensions? And also, for what reasons? Same as the other questions before.
And just for clarity, Councilman, it's all building permits or demolition, just specific to demolitions?
Demolition and building permits.
We'll provide that to the chair.
Thank you. I'll leave.
Thank you. Before I go to Councilwoman Blackwell, under public jobs, how do you delineate what is done by crane or by hand, demolition?
For public jobs, all demolitions are done by hand.
So why is it that you only use the hand demolition versus crane in public jobs?
Most of our demolitions are done in residential communities, and it's the safest practice to employ in a residential community when you have pedestrians and citizens nearby.
And do you use scaffolding to protect perimeter properties at all?
It depends on the assessment at the site if that's required.
Have you used it in the past?
Yes.
And under what occasions, to your recollection, would you use scaffolding?
Again, based on the assessment, that determines what methods will be utilized.
I mean, generally, if you were to do a hand demolition, under what instances would you, on occasion, use scaffolding, and to what degree? Or is it so unique that there is not a standard? Is that what I'm hearing?
Correct.
All right, so after these questions, I'm going to transition to say, what are lessons learned? And what are we going to do different and under that executive order? But I will yield at this point to Councilwoman Blackwell.
Thank you. We wanted to know if there's a process, if someone has been cited on a construction site, and how far down that goes between the worker, the developer, and the construction manager, who gets cited, and if there's a process for that, and if we keep those records, and if so, how long?
Yes, if we issue violations, and if there's, in terms of permit, if they're not complying with the permit, we do fail the inspection. And also, if it's to the point where it's issues that we need to take further action, we do so.
And that would be how far down, to the worker on the site, and how far up?
It's usually the person that's on the responsible party for the permit, and who's on the permit application.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Chair recognizes Councilman Kenny.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner, what are the requirements or specifications or educational requirements to become a building inspector in the city of Philadelphia? What does civil service require to be hired as an inspector?
Primarily, there's a number of trainings that they go through in order to...
Is there any, but prior to hiring, is there any minimum requirements of education, past experience, and the like that would make someone eligible to be a building commissioner?
And I wanted to clarify, all inspectors come in as trainees, and through that process, they receive their credentials to perform certain inspections.
So the testing process to become an inspector involves just a basic civil service test, or is there, so there's no educational background requirements or work experience requirements or things of that nature?
Yeah, there are just a basic civil service examination, and once they are a trainee, then they are required to meet certain training certifications and modules in order to perform the task that we're asking them.
Prospectively, do you think that that's something we need to evaluate as far as who we're hiring to do this work in the first place?
Absolutely not. I think our guys.
Absolutely not.
I think our guys are trained adequately. I think they are very well prepared to do their jobs, and I think that we have an extensive program in-house to determine if someone is not qualified to do the job, and they're dismissed during a probationary period if they can't meet the qualifications.
Do you believe there would be any benefit, for example, as people change careers, as they do in many areas of work life, that a person who's been in the construction business, who has been in the demolition business, who has done other types of work for other governments, state, federal, would be kind of a person or people that you'd want to attract to?
I certainly think we can look at it, but the inspectors that I currently have working for me are very well trained.
Prospectively, retrospectively, I'm not criticizing. Prospectively, I'm saying going forward, if a person has worked for 20, 25 years in the construction industry and is now retiring from that particular business, does that make sense to maybe try to attract? Yes. I mean, for example, in the police department, we often look to go to the military because of discipline and training and education. So that's a person that is attractive to us as a police officer. Should we be looking to do that in the future?
That's something that we should consider, yes.
Okay. What do you believe the role of the Philadelphia Fire Department should be or could be in relation to demolition projects or large construction projects? Should we have interface with, I mean, those are obviously the first people in a disaster or in a tragedy. They're the people who need to get in there, or at times their own folks are involved in a building collapse or tragedy. Is there some interface with L&I and with the fire department that makes sense going forward? Because I know in other cities, Boston, New York, Chicago, there's a real active participation in demolition permits with those fire departments.
Councilman Kenny, one of the things that I've been trying to make sure that we build out is what I call as you know, with police, I've spent a lot of time with Commissioner Ramsey building what's known as a real-time crime center. I'm trying to bring that same issue in public safety across the board by interfacing through GPS and through tablets to be able to know what each of the public safety departments are. And I have an expanded view of public safety. It's not just fire and police, as you know. It's also with L&I and streets and DHS, quite frankly, trying to make sure that we know exactly where all of our folks are and literally what they're running into. And you know, we finally have the platform with our GIS platform that we've built over the last 3 years that is now gone active, and we are now trying to flush out how do we now integrate all of these, not only permits, but also reviews, so each department would have an understanding of what's coming up, where it's happening, and do it in real time. It has taken a while to get the platform built, but as I'm sure as the chair knows, the place where we have put a lot of our assets is opening up next week. You guys will be invited to come down to see what's happening in public safety, and always understand that the integrated model of public safety is something that we are doing. So I agree with you. I think that I have taken lessons from other cities in order to come up with this model. The investment as a result of, you know, the financial matters that we've had to deal with in the city make it a little slower than we all wanted. But yes, the answer is yes. We do want to make sure that on an integrated basis that each of those departments have some not only review, but actually can bring their own expertise and their own eye to various things. And that's something we've been trying to build for the last 3.5 years.
Would that also entail the sharing of information, say, on a battalion basis?
Yes.
Battalion by battalion as to what demolitions are going on, whether
Yes.
they're residential or commercial, private or public, what are going on in that particular battalion, so that a chief would have at least the advanced knowledge of what potential problems there might be in that battalion?
The answer is yes. As you know, we've divided, and we have more responsibility now on our battalion chiefs, where they are getting active information, and I want to get even more to them. And I'm hoping now that this GIS environment that we built is active, that they will begin to see in real time those kinds of things. So the answer is yes, Councilman.
And no specific reference to 22nd and Market, but I will tell you that the Sunday Inquirer piece and the video that accompanied that at Philly.com relative to Heavy Rescue 1 was extremely inspiring. When I look at the capabilities and dedication of the battalion chief that runs that unit, the captain that left his home on vacation to come in and to participate and help in the rescue, and the folks that were on that scene, firefighters who didn't wait for the apparatus but ran from their station house on Market Street down, it is inspiring to me to know that those people actually work for us, and that if I'm in trouble or any of us are in trouble, that's the quality of people that's coming to save us. So their involvement in this process is critical. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Kenny. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Sanchez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Going back to the issue of training, as this committee moves forward, I think it would be important that the chair and the committee be provided with what are those basic requirements for L&I inspectors. what are the number of hours and the types of subject training that they've received, what are the ongoing continuum training that we provide, so that as we begin to look at best practices and kind of requirements, I know we recently got a visit and a review as part of our international review for best practices in L&I, and I think it's important that we document what we do so that as we compare it to other cities, we can look at, are we in line, are we, or do we exceed that? And I know the review conducted by some of the peer cities and their feedback to me was that they were very impressed with our operations and what we had been able to do, and I want to put that on the record because I think it's important. But I think for the purposes of this investigatory committee, that we document that and capture that. I do want you to address the issue of we have begun a process of cross-training for our L&I inspectors, and we've moved away from some of the specialized units to the geographic units. So can you talk a little bit how we ensured that people, through that cross-training, what kind of interface that happened? We now have a geographic model. You may want to kind of talk about where we were and then kind of where we've gone to around the cross-training.
In the past, we had different units responsible for different aspects of licensing and permitting and also checking on property maintenance conditions. It's mainly related to our property maintenance inspectors, where you would have certain inspectors responsible for inspecting just businesses, some responsible just for inspecting residential units, and then we had C&I inspectors that would be responsible for larger buildings, commercial buildings and industrial buildings specifically. We combine the units so that there will be, all inspectors will be multi-trained in every aspect. And we think that there's greater efficiencies and more responsibility where we don't have to send 3 inspectors out to do an inspection for different locations or a specialized inspection. One inspector has the capability now of doing all 3 of the factors that relate to it. So we thought that was a much more efficient process for all of our inspectors to be multi-trained and be able to do multiple functions.
Could you share to the chair the amount of training that went into this new business model as it relates to the staffing, what we had in place to make sure that that could happen?
I can provide that data for you, yes.
I think that's important. One of the issues for us is the OSHA regulations. So can you, as part of that, and then if you want to speak to it now, speak to how many hours of OSHA training, how we interface with OSHA training for our inspectors, and what the ongoing relationship? I know at different times in our history we've had a more aggressive relationship. What's the relationship? How does that get infused in our daily practices?
I certainly can provide what relationships that we existed. I know we do communicate with OSHA if there's issues regarding worksite safety. To the extent that it's a formal program, I will certainly give you that information.
Okay, thank you. Can you also provide to the chair, as part of, again, our review, not only the amount of hours that we provide for training, but the investment by employee that we have as it relates to training?
Can you describe what you mean by
well,
investment?
Well, if we have specialized training, what are we investing in our workforce for their training?
Is this a dollar figure? Is this a dollar figure that you're looking for?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Chair recognizes Councilman Heenan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner, who's responsible for notifying the properties on each side of a demolition, across the street and in the rear of the subject site that's being demoed?
That would be our inspectors.
The city's inspectors?
Yes, sir.
I want to ask a few questions about 311. All right, so how are 311 complaints transmitted to the inspector?
Normally they are when a complaint comes into 311, it generates a work order that's transported to our Hansen system, and it's assigned to an inspector to follow up, given the service level requirement of the priority of the request.
Okay, what is the time frame? Is there a time frame in, the work order to?
Some vary. Generally, it's 30 days response, but depending on the severity of the request, emergencies require immediate response.
How are the complaints prioritized? I get safety, in safety priority, and the call number coming into L&I from 311?
I can get you the priority order of which pushes something up the chain earlier, higher than another, but specifically I don't have the information right now which prompts something to be. In general, I can tell you that safety is always the highest priority and the things that we address first.
And Commissioner, I would just state that 311, we've done a lot of advertising, and the advertising for 311 it's not for emergencies. So technically, the very definition of something coming through 311, the operators, if they believe that it should be pressed and made into a 911 response, then obviously they kind of push it over immediately. But if they're just taking a complaint then goes through the normal process. But 311 is not for emergencies. 911 is for emergencies. So that's the distinction that we always tell the public. But I'll be glad to provide and have 311 and the process and the procedures. I can give that to the chair if you'd like.
Well, I'd appreciate that. And I'm going to skip over my next question. I'm going to get back to it because you hit on something regarding the emergencies. So how is the qualifications or training of a 311 operator? Are they trained to understand what's an emergency and what is not emergency?
There is a training
With respect to construction and demolition.
I think that an operator comes in with a certain level of understanding about what their role is, and that they are then trained, quote unquote. And again, I will provide the specifics of that to the chair so that you can review what that involves. But a lot of times when you're talking about the difference between a 311 and a 911 call, that's going to be subject to the experience of the person that's there. I know that our operators on both systems are trained, and there's a lot of handoff automatically between one and the other as we go forward. But I'll be glad to give you the specifics in writing because we do have that in writing.
Being proactive.
Yes, just being proactive.
Moving forward, having our operators trained in what's an emergency or what could be a potential emergency regarding to property maintenance and any codes regarding L&I in the safety of construction and demolition, I think is equally as important.
Okay.
As we move forward when it comes to the business.
So, do I understand you to say that there should be a hotline number or website or
a hotline number? I mean, I'm not sure. I'm concerned about the training, all right, and the knowledge
I hear you.
of
I
an
hear you.
operator in a call center,
right?
Regarding public safety and the construction and demolition business.
And I think
right?
that
and who's making that decision, whether it's an emergency or it's not an emergency, I think is a valid question and concern, as we go through this process.
And I'm sure that there's probably standards that we can review, we can look at. I'm sure there's probably national standards that we have a very good director of our 311, Rosetta Liu. She does great work. Rich Negrin, I'm sure would be interested in looking at what the best practices are, and as we move forward, if there's something that we need to do or some way to make it better, obviously we're all committed to doing that. 311 is not supposed to be for emergencies, and we just have to hot link it over to 911 whenever that happens. And I think that we've done a great job in making sure that we've built out something that's sustainable.
And I appreciate that. And one thing I do appreciate is the commissioner taking a practical approach and a real real-life situation where you have somebody from the general public who doesn't know who to call or what, just that they see something that may be eminently dangerous, putting the public in harm's way for whatever, gut reaction or observation that they be making with a non-professional or non-trained eye, that somebody, wherever they call, is also a little bit trained in how to field the call. So that was my other, and my last question regarding 311. All right, when a work order gets put out and it comes down to the inspector goes out to the site and sees that it's either unfounded or there's been some action taken. Do they report back to 311?
Yes, they put it in
the
Hanson,
findings?
and Hanson tells what action was taken. Reports it connects back to 311 to show what action was taken.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Heenan. Councilman Ken.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is there a special permit or licensing requirement for people who operate heavy equipment, either on a construction site or on a demolition site?
Under the code, that's under the code, I don't require any. No.
Okay.
I don't know.
What is your opinion relative to having someone certified over a certain level of certain size of equipment, whether it's again demolition or whether it's construction, to be nationally certified and by some nationally qualifying organization, or having something that we could look at to make sure that people who are operating heavy equipment are in fact qualified to do so?
I think that that's one of the things that we're looking at going forward, to see whether or not there are those kinds of A, organizations, B, certification, C, how is it put into a regulatory environment. I think those are all great questions. That's something we need to take a look at.
Okay. And in other jurisdictions and in some of the institutional private sector, demolition or construction firms are pre-qualified. So in order to even apply for or to bid on something, there needs to be a pre-qualification process that firms go through. And up front, that can be a lengthy process, but once it's completed, it seems to be a better base of information on how we can monitor and keep track of what companies are doing. Is that something that you'd be willing to look at, or is it something you've thought about already?
I think it's something we're willing to look at. I think that the one thing that we have to, and I'm sure this committee knows, we are always looking to balance. We have to, and because if we ended up, one of the things that I would always you'd have to balance is, if we make things so high, and if it goes so high, are we becoming anti-development, which hurts our city in the future? But then we're always balancing. We're always balancing what we're trying to do and what we're addressing. And I think it's something we're willing to look at. I think that this is where our brother and sister cities across the country, some have had different roles. I mean, I've made a couple of inquiries over the last week myself to a couple other deputy mayors that I know and talked about in detail. This is, Philadelphia is a pretty good stalwart right now as a national model for what we do in this area. And I told them, but we're going to get even better after we have some thoughtful inquiries. And I think that's something that we should do. I agree with you.
I mean, I think a lot of the problems that we face, and whether it's demolition, whether it's tragic situations, or whether it's the stuff that I call Commissioner Williams about on a Sunday morning, to get a permit, if we do the advanced work of vetting a company appropriately, from its financial responsibilities, its legitimacy as a company, its employees' qualifications and credentials, if we do that up front, and I think that larger companies that do work on this area regularly are used to that process. It's not an onerous process for them. If we know going up front that when that permit is handed across the desk, you're pretty sure that company is going to provide the right requirements to do the job, safety, and economic responsibility. And I just would recommend that we look at that. Again, you don't want to set up an onerous process where development is a problem, but I mean, in cities like New York and other places that are doing well in development, that doesn't seem to bother them or don't bother the contractors. But I think it's kind of the advanced work that's done that's necessary to keep someone from sliding under the radar and getting a permit that they shouldn't really have.
And I think that that's something obviously we're looking at. I think also that we want to make sure that we are able to engender and getting newer people into the business as well, because we want to be able to ask questions, and I know that's some of the questions that the chair was going to get to about how we are now requiring a little bit of the background, more background information, so we can see what jobs have you worked, what jobs, that's going to be part of the permitting process. So knowledge will be power. But we want to make sure that people, much like an apprentice program, you just don't jump out. We should at least tell us something about what it is. And I think that's one of the changes that the mayor issued in the executive order that will go a long way to helping us define who this is. But I'm always looking at making sure that there are other opportunities for people who are able to get involved and work on a job, use that work experience to become entrepreneurs, to build big companies, and as they're building through and getting their experience, they're doing it safely. And I think there's a way to do this in a balanced way as we go forward. And I wholeheartedly agree with your recommendation, and I think we'll do that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. And I echo your sentiments. During the developmental phase of NTI, many small companies were held to a high standard, but were able to enter a marketplace that theretofore wasn't open to them. And we don't want to be a closed city, per se, of new businesses, but all businesses going forward will be held to a higher standard. And I think that's safe to say. After Councilwoman Sanchez is recognized, I want to segue into two questions. One, what are lessons learned? Mm-hmm. What are we doing differently that we did not do before? And then also, you mentioned that Philadelphia might be, recognized nationally as doing it right, but who's held higher? Is there other cities that we emulate? And I don't mean municipal envy, but who can we draw a lesson from that we can add to our playbook to better enhance public safety?
And just on that second question, because I'm going to, on the second question, that's what I think our investigations and our reviews are going to end up telling us, because obviously I'm not going to be able to sit here now and say this is a city I've already identified. I think that that's going to be what this process and what a lot of the investigations will show us. Amy Curlin, obviously is doing an investigation to help us look at recommendations about what, and part of what she will do, I am sure, knowing her and the thoroughness of what she normally does, is that her recommendations will be, these are other things that we need to get done. These are other areas that we might be looking at. So on the second question, I can't answer it directly today, but I will be able to have an answer, I'm sure, well before this committee finishes its work over the summer.
Okay. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Sanchez and then Councilman Johnson.
Thank you. Again, these are process questions. Councilman Kenny alluded to the role of the fire department. He asked some questions about asbestos. So can you describe to me the fact that the health department has a role to play on these sites as well as our streets department? How do inspectors interface on a job site? How is the communication? Is there protocols around that communication? Since in many cases when we're talking about demolition, when there's a need to close the street and other permitting. So what is the interface?
Councilwoman, as you know, earlier this year during budget testimony, we formed a construction site task force that will be permanent effective July 1st, and their role and responsibility would be to audit job sites. Right now we're doing it on a temporary basis because we're using existing personnel, but with budget authorization we're going to hire a permanent team to address those issues. Our inspectors communicate with streets department and other relevant departments depending on what the issue is, especially when it comes down to the public right-of-way. And so if there's an issue of a contractor who has taken up a sidewalk space or part of the street, we ensure that they have a right-of-way permit by communicating through reporting it to the streets department for follow-up and then taking appropriate action at that point. So we do have constant communication with various departments depending on what the issue is.
So part of this new task force, will they be charged with establishing those protocols so that they're, again, we're going back to the checkoff list of, one of the things that we hope, and this we'll get into in this next phase, is that we try to close the loop on the level of discretion and then establish some standards. Is that part of what this committee is going to be charged with, outlining protocols around how do we ensure that the health piece of this and the streets piece of this all lead to a better and a safer work site?
I think that we collectively establish what those protocols are and give them the charge of enforcing them, and that's going to be their responsibility to ensure whatever protocols that are established within our department and with other supporting agencies, that they're charged with making sure that they follow up and enforce the actions that we require to ensure public safety. It's a dedicated team, again, to address those issues.
Who will be represented in this group? What departments?
The initial task force of 6 members will be all L&I inspectors with the supervisor, but members from the Department of Revenue and also working with the Department of Streets will be a part of it as well.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Chair recognizes Councilman Johnson.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Gillison, I just wanted to just get an idea and overview of the executive order, and can you give us an explanation on how you came up with the recommendations, the content, some of the new practices that will be required just moving forward? I do recognize they are very detailed in terms of checks and balances and making sure proper things are followed moving forward. So I just wanted to get an idea as I was going through the executive order moving forward.
I can tell you that, thank you very much, Councilman. The mayor announced the executive order after talking with a lot of the folks that are not only sitting right next to me, but people who are not only are behind me, to the side of me, and quite frankly, we had an extensive review about what needed to be done both in the short term and long term. We announced that in 2 different and critical areas, permit applications would be different, and then the procedures that had to be followed for demolition inspections. And I'll just go through it rather quickly.
When you do that, could you codify it in a way that says, this is what we used to do, this is the new action taken?
All right.
So
well, I'll be able to tell you that everything that I'm about to state is the stuff that is this is new. This is the new stuff. As the commissioner did, he spent in answer to your questions earlier what was, and these are the things that we have now, and the mayor has announced that we will be doing. So in all new permit applications for complete demolition, it now must include the following documents, any requirements prior to the issuance of the permit. 1, details on the experience and qualifications of the contractor performing the demolition, including the demolition experience of the owner, the company, and its employees. 2, a site safety plan detailing how the contractor proposes to protect pedestrians and adjacent properties. 3, a schedule of the demolition work. Contractor will show length of time for each stage of the project. 4, a professional engineer's report on adjacent property protection for demolition of commercial buildings above 3 stories. 5, also want to make sure that there are no active violations for contractors, and currently there was an order to review all previous violations that were on record. For demolition inspections, the following 6 things will be are being done. Now, at the time of the initial inspection, require the inspector to conduct a site safety review with the contractor prior to the start of work. The goal was to review the steps for protecting adjacent properties and pedestrians, and the inspector will review the schedule of work with the contractor during each inspection to ensure compliance. If there is no contact from the contractor, the required notification of the start of work is not received from the contractor. The inspector will visit the site every 15 business days from the permit date's issuance, and after 45 days, if there's no evidence of legitimate work starting at the permitted demolition site, then the permit will be revoked. Suppose the contractor does start the work and he doesn't tell us, we will end up doing a stop work order until a hearing is held regarding the contractor's failure and the site safety review is completed with the inspector and the contractor. And any complaints, obviously we are now looking to respond within a 24 to 48 hour period, and a detailed report including the nature of the complaint, the explanation of the findings, determination of compliance, and a time, date, stamp photo of all site visits and inspections. Also, L&I has a quality insurance plan that they've already begun, and as just relayed to the chair and to Councilwoman Quinona Sanchez, that as of 7/1, with the budget being adopted, hopefully, that's all I can say about the budget, hopefully tomorrow, that will then allow us to get that done. And we will then start those individuals as of July 1st. And last, the L&I is coordinating with Revenue to make sure all demolition contractors and or subcontractors provide proof of the following: proper insurance, tax clearances, payroll records for all employees before any building permit is approved. Those are the things that were new and part of the executive order. Those are the details as we are working them through. Obviously, that was issued just a couple of weeks ago, but I know the commissioner has already completed a review, has already issued stop work orders on at least 6, I believe, that were demos in progress. And we are learning as we put these new things in. We are continuing to learn and continuing to expand what we're doing and how we're doing it to make sure we're providing a safer environment for our Philadelphians.
If I could, Councilman, the work stoppages, can you highlight what those reasons were?
The majority of them were for lack of proper insurance coverage, so we stopped the jobs for that, and then also there were 1 or 2 for an unsafe site condition.
Just as a quick addendum, are there hours of demolition required? Is there a cutoff time to do demolition in the city of Philadelphia? So is there a night prohibition or anything like that?
The general time is 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. at night.
Is that by ordinance?
Yes, that's by ordinance, yes.
And so are there instances where people sneak back and try to get work done at night?
Yes, there are instances when that occurs, and we certainly...
And a lot of us get calls when I'm sometimes, as everyone knows, I'm around 24/7. I get a call from someone saying, this is going on right now. If you could just get someone out there, we'll do something. I call the commissioner. We try to be as responsive as we can to stop it.
And we have personnel to address those situations?
Well, the construction site task force will work odd hours, doing non-traditional hours. So they won't.
Is that currently, or?
That'll be as of
As of July 1st.
So that will cut down on those pixies in the middle of the night?
We want to maintain, yes, absolutely. We want to maintain a balance to address things that occur during the workday and also that occur during after hours when we're not functioning during the business hours.
Are there instances when we begin a demolition and we discover a hazardous material, and where we do a cease order, and what are some of those occasions?
Again, if there's an unsafe condition, that would prompt a stop work order immediately from our department. If it's an unpermitted site, that would prompt a stop work order as well. And so those are usually the parameters for us to stop a job that are creating hazards for the public.
I can also add, Councilman, that sometimes we have unexploded ordnance that is found when demolition is occurring, and I get information quite a lot on having to respond with either fire and or police and or bomb squad. So that happens as well. So this is something that the department has had to deal with. And, you know, we have very good and we have very professional folks doing their job. And it speaks to what Councilman Kenny was talking about, the integration of the information. And that's why it's important for everyone to know as quickly as we can what we're doing and how we're doing it.
You know, knock on wood, but in a post 9/11, post-Boston environment, this task force has to be multidisciplined in order to safeguard us in ways that we don't even know that we need protection from. So it's going to be, I think, as we move forward, we'll learn as we go and evolve as we go as well through these things. But I'm glad to hear that the hours are extended now on this task force based on the passage of the budget, that we'll have that task force operating almost 24/7.
They will be accessible 24/7, but we'll work a standard work schedule. Correct.
Okay.
Okay.
So describe for us how we will deal with the quality assurance plans safety plans, quality assurance plans for these. Who will review those?
We are changing the process. Just going back to earlier where Councilman Kenny referenced how does someone get a building permit for demolition, and we stated that it was over the counter. That process is no longer. Will be treated like any plan that's submitted, where there will be a review of the entire application from the experience of the contractor to ensure that all of the contractors and subcontractors are tax compliant, and to ensure that there's a worksite safety plan that is submitted and reviewed by our department, and any structure over 3 stories should be accompanied by a professional engineer's report or a competent person so that we can ensure the safety of any adjoining buildings in the community.
I care, but I care more about safety. Let me preempt my remarks with that. Is it going to add to the time of issuance of permits and therefore to the completion of demolition?
Yes, it will.
And in your professional estimation, to what degree?
15 to 20 days to approve a building permit.
And so we need to learn to be a little more patient when it comes to that stuff. And being safe has a time cost.
That's correct.
All right. Chair recognizes, I don't know who was which way you want to, Councilman Heenan, and then Councilwoman Sanchez. No, I'm sorry, Councilman, were you? Okay.
Thank you, Chairman. What is required for a licensed contractor, for somebody to be allowed to be permitted to have a license in the city of Philadelphia?
First, they have to have a commercial activity license. Then they have to have a renewable contractor's license. They have to have proof of liability insurance right now, which is at a limit of $500,000, and they must be tax compliant.
Okay, which explains why you had some stop work orders.
Correct.
Because they didn't
That's
meet
correct.
the requirements, right?
That's correct.
What would happen, what happens regarding a revocation or suspension? You know, you find somebody who is not in compliance, you give them, you know, X amount of days or an opportunity to come into compliance. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay, so if somebody is habitual or willfully continues to break the law, you have penalties and options such as revocation and suspension?
That's correct. They are entitled to appeal at an administrative hearing, but we have the capabilities to enact that with the understanding that they do have due process to appeal.
Right. The expediters. There was a conversation earlier today at this hearing regarding the expediter's license. How often does an expediter's license, how often do they get reviewed? When is the review?
It's annual.
It's annual?
It's an annual review.
So on a yearly basis, they are renewed?
Yes, that's correct.
And it's through the Department of L&I?
Correct.
right? And again, does revenue needs to cross-reference or cross-check any issuances or renewals of licenses?
At the time of issuance, and this is something that we have to look into, that does not occur during renewals, and that's something that we are going to work with revenue to look at that change in policy.
Okay. The executive order was mentioned several times, and in it, you know, it states the construction site task force. I think that you're a product of your brainchild. Is that correct?
The level of responsibility obviously will increase, but it was a combination of the mayor's administration, several concerned members like yourself, and a collective effort to form that task force to address the problem of unpermitted, unsafe work sites.
All right, good. And I look forward to being continuing working with yourself and the administration and your senior staff on expanding that, construction site task force, dealing with multiple departments collaborating, giving an opportunity for the general public to come in and, file their complaints, directly to them in some of our previous conversations. So I look forward into doing that. I just wanted to state that publicly, that, that is something that you have brought to the table here. And, I look forward to some of the ideas that we've been discussing and expanding that and having it open to the public, where we can bring in multiple departments, to ensure that the 15 and 20-day period of turning over a permit and, complaints that are out there, whether they go through 311 or not, there's another avenue to ensure safety compliance in the city.
Thank you, Councilman. We look forward to it as well.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilwoman Sanchez?
Thank you. I also appreciate the fact that the administration quickly responded and put in place some procedures and some protocols, and the executive order is quite detailed. So can you talk to me a little bit around its implementation? I know you mentioned July 1st because some of this stuff has budget details. What is going to be happening over the course of the next few weeks as we ramp up implementation, and what's your timeline?
Councilwoman, let me clarify. The regulations and executive order is in effect right now. We have sent letters out to all contractors informing them of the code regulation change.
Can all of those documents be shared with the chair for the committee?
Absolutely. We'll forward it to you. We also trained, in the process of training all of our inspectors on the new regulations, and any application that has come in prior or during that training phase will be personally reviewed by my executive staff to ensure that they meet the qualifications and intent of the new order.
What's the timeline for that?
That's immediate.
Immediate. So
Yes.
by 30 days, 60 days, everyone will have gotten how many hours of training?
Yes, the training for regulations, it's an overview of what the new process is. It's going to be an ongoing training as well. Specific to demolitions, we've met also with the National Demolition Association, who had the opportunity to review some of the changes and have made some recommendations and have graciously agreed to continue working with us. One of the things that came out of that meeting is that we all agreed that our inspectors need specific training regarding demolitions, in addition to other requirements that require this specialized task of performing this type of service. So we're looking forward to working with them as well to try to improve our number of inspectors to make them even more competent and knowledgeable in this specific area.
I will be looking for at our next hearing for details in terms of timeline. I think it's really important that we set some hard dates for ourselves in terms of training, because it is a pretty prescribed executive order. So I want to make sure that we're saying in the next 60 days, in the next 90 days, we will do A, B, C, and D, and in the next 120 days, we will do A, B, C, and D. I think that's important.
Absolutely.
You met with the National Committee for Demolition. Have you identified other specific trainings that will be incorporated for the implementation of this executive order? Are you looking at OSHA, and have you thought through?
Yeah, we met. We also reached out to risk management within our own division. I think the protocols of the past were shared regarding these type of projects and conditions, and so that's another area that we're looking to see if those trainings are still relevant to what we need to do moving forward. We're also looking at other cities right now as well. The Demolition Association had recommended the city of Boston, New York, and some other areas that we should look at to see if they could be modified for here in the city of Philadelphia, and that's some of the things that we're looking at right now.
Okay. You talked a little bit about the fact that this new team would have regular hours, although they will be available 24/7. Is there a reason why we are not being very deliberate in saying we're going to have people working at this time doing proactive sites? You said that they're going to be in a traditional schedule. I mean, this is one of those times where we're going to...
Non-traditional schedule.
Non-traditional schedule.
Non-traditional schedule.
A non-traditional
Yes,
schedule.
yeah.
They won't work the normal business hours of our department. They would be working off hours to catch some of the things that was mentioned earlier by Councilman Kemp.
Now that will send shockwaves out to those individuals who have heretofore had a comfort level with the fact that 9 to 5 is 9 to 5 and they can go to work. So I'm encouraged that we are going to do something different in that regard.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I think that's very important. I think part of what we want to do in this very public discussion is be very laser focused in telling folks that the paradigm has shifted and that we are paying attention. You know, I have no shame on a Sunday taking a picture and sending it at whatever time to all the folks, but for folks to know that this demolition that happens on Sundays is going to be proactively reviewed is very, very important, particularly in residential areas. One of the things that we've seen is a spike in people calling our offices saying there's a demolition going on next door. I don't want to be the next tragedy, so I think it's important that there's some quick response to that. As it relates to the implementation of this, are there any additional resources that the administration is allocating right now for the implementation of the executive order, or is it just what we have budgeted?
As it is right now, I can tell you that what we've budgeted is what we anticipate is our needs. However, as we have said, and as the mayor has made clear, as we get into this, if there are going to be the need for additional resources, we will not only revisit it, but we will, work to make sure that not only you are informed, but that what we're doing and how we're going to make sure it happens. It's clear that we're starting a new thing, so we're kind of guessing what our needs are, but we are willing to be flexible in that, and we'll deal with it as it comes up.
Let me make a suggestion that because this is a new executive order, one of the things that is always challenging to us is, people get cited and they try to come into compliance, and many times we have to do some hand-holding. Let me strongly suggest that you very quickly prescribe what an ideal safety plan is, that when folks come to us as we implement this new procedures, we could give them the expectation so that, again, this is an area as identified by the Chairman Jones, where there has been a lot of work at creating an industry. There's been a lot of work in supporting an industry that should be open and accessible. And as we create standards for high quality, that we do the best job possible in assisting people come into compliance.
Okay.
And so I'd like to see us very quickly come up with what we haven't done in the past, as we talked earlier, that people are not given something that this is our expectation in terms of safety, this is our expectation in terms of engineering, whatever, that we quickly put together those sample documents to say,
Okay.
at minimum, this is what we're requiring. I think that will help the industry not feel like we're being overly burdensome, but that we want people in compliance and meeting high standards. I think that's an area that, given this industry makeup,
Okay.
and it's important.
I thank you, Councilwoman. We will obviously be looking at that, and that'll be incorporated in all the things that we're going to be doing over the next couple of days, weeks, and months ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Very quickly, and we'll then be ready for our next witness, if there are no other, there are questions. Real quick, are there any anticipated, as we go along, fee increase requests that may be appropriate based on the amount of new supervision regulation?
I think that that's going to be something we'll have to continue to evaluate. I know that there were a couple of fees that were changed earlier on during our problems. I think that that's something we're going to take a look at. That may be something that we'll be bringing to council in the fall, saying that these fees need to be associated with the work, the additional work that's being done. And as long as we can, something that Andrew is, and the law department says, as long as we can look at what do we need to do and how much it's costing us to do it, and what's a good fee that we can charge that is not going to be too onerous on one side, and yet we can actually figure out how we can move the dime forward. Those are things that we'll be looking at over the next weeks and months.
So we'll be ready for you during these 4 hearings. We are going to conduct, looking at what other municipalities do, what we need to do. And if it costs a little more, takes a little longer to do, but people are a lot safer, that's a good trade-off for me.
I understand. I thank you very much.
All right. Councilman Kenny?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Going back to the inappropriate work that's done, off hours, evenings, many suburban communities, unpermitted, unlicensed, many suburban communities employ the practice of confiscation or impoundment of equipment and tools. Have we looked at our special task force to empower them the ability to take that kettle, to take that roofing kettle, or to take that truck, or to take those tools? Because what happens, and Commissioner, we've had this experience before where we actually had to lock some people up who pulled down a stop work order and then went back in the building.
Right.
I mean, once you start getting that serious and people start understanding that you're not coming in here as an unlicensed contractor without a permit to do work at 2 o'clock in the morning putting a roof on, then I think we may get really, they'll know we're serious if we start. So I would appreciate if you could look into the possibility of that impoundment of equipment and tools in that circumstance. On May 8th of 2013, the mayor signed a bill that was co-sponsored by myself and Councilman Heenan relative to contractor reliability, contractor responsibility. I read the section of that dealing with third-party permits, that practice is not permitted now. What is your current view of a third-party permit expediter pulling a permit for a job that he or she has no relationship to at all, other than using their credentials as a licensed contractor? And I'll give you a specific example.
Yeah.
There's an electrical contractor who pulls permits all the time. That is a sole proprietor, has no employees, is an elderly gentleman with a contractor's license. He pulls permits and hands it over to companies that may be licensed, may not be licensed, may have qualified employees, may not. One specific job dealing with municipal court that I became aware of, and this is our own court system doing it, is that particular person pulled that permit, a couple permits, turned it over to companies from New York State who were not licensed to do business in the city, did not have payroll accounts that registered with us, did not pay local, state, or federal taxes, did not pay unemployment compensation or workers' compensation, and basically lived in a motel on Route 73 in Cherry Hill for 3 weeks while they did the job. What is your current belief in who can pull a permit and where that permit goes after it's awarded to that individual across the counter.
Councilman, I certainly think that's something that we certainly need to look at, that there's need to be a level of accountability for someone who comes in to pull a permit or apply for a permit on behalf of another contractor. There has to be some relationship and some responsibility of that person if the practice is going to continue, that there's a level of accountability established.
What do you
That's
believe
just my opinion.
What do you believe the situation is now based on the legislation that was signed by the mayor?
I would believe that is no longer permitted, but I'm going to go back and take a look at that. And if you could give me just a little bit more offline information on that one, I would really appreciate it.
Well, that job's done. I mean,
Well, I know, but
it's
sometimes
over.
sometimes you can learn from history, and that's one of those I'd like to see how we could be a lot better about
And I think one
attacking
of the safety precautions is to have the person who's pulling the permit be responsible for all the work that they're asking us for permission to do, as opposed to a engineer, an architect, a licensed contractor, and pulling a permit and then putting up, when something goes wrong, pulling up their hands and saying, well, I had nothing to do with that because all I did was pull the permit and I handed it over to, Three Stooges, a construction company, and something bad happened.
Okay.
So I really would like to know what you believe the company, what you believe their responsibility is,
Okay.
and whether we should allow it at all.
Right. Okay.
And on that, is it on the application, it would seem, and this is an open question, the signature of the property owner, the signature of the person pulling the permit, and then the signature of the possible subcontractor that is doing the job, so that we have a line of responsibility. There might be something that we consider. And when people are doing what Councilman Kenny describes, is it not fraud?
I would think it's fraud.
But let me just follow up, if I may. In New Jersey, and this is something I would like you guys to consider as far as the line of responsibility goes. In New Jersey, for example, if you are a developer or a general contractor, and it's generally a developer, who will make a financial decision based on price and their ability to maximize their profit. If they make a decision to hire a company that employs people who are not documented, who employs, and again, let me state for the fact, no one is more impassioned and supportive of immigration than myself. But I do think that many people who are employed that are undocumented are being taken advantage of because, again, no unemployment compensation, no workers' compensation. That individual gets hurt in a job, they're out of luck in many ways. So I do recognize the need for a clear pathway to citizenship in this country and support all of our immigrants. However, the unscrupulous contractor or developer who uses them and abuses them, I think needs more responsibility, to take more responsibility. In New Jersey, for example, if the Revenue Department or one of the agencies that are responsible for monitoring construction finds that the developer, finds that the job is being done in an improper and illegal way, and all the back taxes that were beaten and all the stuff that was avoided goes back onto the developer. Mm-hmm. Because the developer is ultimately the person who makes the decision based on price and competence whether to hire someone or not. Mm-hmm. What responsibility do you believe that the developer has in a construction project that goes awry or a demolition project that goes awry? Do you believe that they should be held, not just from an insurance standpoint, but from a back taxes standpoint, personally responsible?
I think that's something that we need to look at. I think that it's a very good question. I think it's something that over the next couple of months we'll be looking at, and then maybe we'll come back with some, because obviously that would need ordinance changes and code changes and everything else, but that's something we need to look at.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. So those signatures on those documents that we take in says that they attest to the quality of and truthfulness of that permit, and something that we should look at by way of making sure that all three of those entities, if there are three, are on there. And again, then we hold them liable in a meaningful way. Councilman Heenan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And not to belabor and continue on that subject of responsibility with permits and third-party permits. It is a law now, as you well know, and how we enforce the law is something that we're going to have to continue to have a dialogue over the course of the next coming months, and how we enforce it. We may want to, take a look at, some suggestions as my fellow colleagues had suggested about, we're trying to change behavior, right? And if there are some unscrupulous contractors and people who not only are fraudulently breaking the law on misrepresenting themselves on an application, they certainly are not paying taxes in the city of Philadelphia. It's just again, is another indication on why we need somebody permanently placed over in the Department of L&I from the Revenue Department, and have a more of a collaborative, effort with the multiple departments, dealing with some of these issues that arise at the questioning here today and the ongoing conversations, that we have had. People who, they're just, if they're bad guys, they're bad guys, right? They're cheating in one area, they're going to cheat in another, all right? And ultimately, if they're cheating and they're breaking the law, people are put in danger, and public safety is at risk. So, again, not to generalize specific, but somebody needs to be accountable, all right, for their behavior. So if we're going to change behavior, we need to change behavior and send a message. I don't care who that is, if it's a speculator, if it's a owner, or it's a contractor. They have to be responsible, all right, for public safety reasons and for the city's accountability. We have no idea, all right, who is on these work sites, unless somebody complains about it. So, given the opportunity to present, public complaints on some of these issues, in moving forward, I think, we have some work cut out for us over the summer.
Thank you, Councilman.
Thank you, Councilman Hena. Are there any other questions for this panel? Seeing none, thank you, and I would say two things. One, we will be having 4 other hearings dealing with best practices and other issues. It would be helpful if someone from your respective department was available for some questions as they arise, but also you may find something that intrigues your public policy curiosity that you might want to follow up on. So we appreciate your cooperation, and we move forward this summer together to try to make people safer at the end of the day. So thank you very much for your attendance.
Thank you very much.
Right. Will the clerk please read the name of the next person to testify? Is it the will of the group that we take a 5-minute? The stenographer says she's okay. Now, did you say that? Okay, so we're going to soldier on. Okay, could you read the name?
City Controller Alan Bukovich.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Please be seated and state your name for the record and begin your testimony.
To Alan Bukovich, City Controller. Okay.
Begin.
Okay, good afternoon. Thank you, Chairman Jones and the other members of the Special Investigating Committee on Demolition Practices. We've already covered the next sentence. I'm Alan Bukovich, Philadelphia City Controller. I'd like to first express sincere sympathy to the families of the victims who lost their lives, and would also like to acknowledge the courage of the police, firefighters, construction workers, and bystanders who did everything they could to assist those injured and trapped. Over the years, our office has looked at the Department of Licenses and Inspections, and we've consistently found that L&I has had a shortage of inspectors, which has hindered its ability to perform mandated functions under the Home Rule Charter to protect public safety. As a result of concerns about potential hazards involving dangerous properties or buildings that were unfit for habitation, we issued a report. Actually, we did 2 back-to-back reports in 2006 which assessed the timeliness with which L&I administers and enforces Philadelphia's various code requirements that affect public safety. In that report and in subsequent years, I've repeatedly called on city administrations that L&I be provided a minimum of 57 additional inspectors, which in 2006 would have cost an additional $3 million a year. As a result of that audit, we found that L&I failed to meet management standards for responding to complaints and reports of building code infractions. What we did in those audits was we looked at L&I's own standards for response. And under their criteria, the most serious complaints received by L&I are those of buildings in imminent danger of collapse, which under their standards required inspections within 24 hours. 70% of these complaints were not inspected within the required 24-hour period, and in fact were taking at least anywhere from 30 days to 6 months at that time. Additionally, we found that L&I had lagged behind in its annual inspections of various residential and commercial facilities that are required to be compliant with Philadelphia's fire code. Of the 500 cases we sampled at that time from a backlog of inspection reports awaiting data entry, almost half had not been followed up within the time frame required of the violation notice. Site visits made to properties weeks after inspectors had issued violations to property owners disclosed that numerous dangerous conditions still existed. For instance, we visited 3 daycare centers where we observed numerous fire and other safety violations. Those centers had not been visited by L&I inspectors in well over a year. At the time we testified, we asked for additional money for L&I. We asked for the additional inspectors. The commissioner at that time, I don't even recall who it was, in 2006, came in and said he didn't need any more money, he didn't need any more inspectors, they could cope with what was budgeted. We keep coming back at this problem in different ways. So in October 2012, our staff, consisting of investigators and an engineer, visited construction sites in North Philadelphia where we found areas where the city's monitoring and enforcement of contractors and development was inadequate or non-existent. Such lack of enforcement included construction sites that did not have required posted permits, lack of properly maintained silt fences or compost filter tubes, lack of proper stormwater inlet protection, air vacuum hoses not being used, and power saws to collect dust, missing dust screens, and illegal short dumping. This lack of enforcement permits contractors and developers to violate various codes and safety standards. At that time, I called on the city to take an aggressive approach to enforcing the building and construction code to protect the quality of life for the city's residents. We recommended that the city develop a memorandum of understanding among the 5 enforcement departments, L&I, Health, Water, Streets, and Police, as a means of providing guidance for any inspector from any department observing building code violations so that they could be immediately addressed. In another report issued in October 2012, we visited 23 active construction sites throughout the city where we found 96 conditions that violated public safety ordinances and tax laws. At 19 of the construction sites, subcontractors were not identified on various permits issued by L&I, making it difficult to determine if they were appropriately licensed and ultimately qualified to perform the work. We also found that a majority of sites hazardous work conditions and violations of the U.S. Department of Labor Office of Safety and Health Administration, OSHA standards. It's important that this committee get the answers it needs to not only determine if all city codes and procedures were followed, but to determine if those standards were adequate to prevent tragedies such as the building collapse on June 5th. Recently, the mayor and the Department of Licenses and Inspections announced new initiatives for demolition sites and contractors, including new standards for demolition permit issuance and demolition site inspection to ensure the safety of private demolition sites throughout the city. While these new regulations are very stringent and provide more public safety measures, it is unfortunate that it took a tragedy of this magnitude for this to come about, especially when the city has been forewarned that inspections of construction sites throughout the city were being delayed and ignored. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Controller. We have a copy of this? Couple of things that jumped out of your report. One is that this was the general safety condition for a lot of disciplines within construction within the city of Philadelphia. Is that correct? You looked at a number of different vulnerable points. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. A couple of them that I've heard members of the committee talk about, and one that intrigues me, the memorandum of understanding between interdepartmental folks, water department, streets, and others. Can you elaborate on that a
Well,
bit?
I mean, the city has for a number of years been relentlessly cutting back on personnel. So there's an issue that we have a number of different eyes and ears on the ground that ought to be made use of. So specifically, there were cases where in our audit, L&I would not follow up on an enforcement action because it was really a health code violation, for example, or it was a fire code violation. And what we were recommending was that if there was an L&I inspector at the site and he noted something that was a health code violation, that there be a database and the technology so that that could be forwarded to the health department and they could come out and do the appropriate enforcement action. Or if there was a police officer at the site, or if a sanitation worker happened to notice a dangerous condition, that he be able to enter it into a computer and it would be transmitted to the appropriate department, because there has been relentless budget cutting, there's been relentless reductions in force, and therefore we need to find other ways of getting notice from the eyes and ears on the ground to the people who can do something about it.
So, I mean, I think that is something that we will take a look at and give recommendation to, because I think I heard in different parts of my colleagues' testimony was, what is the role of the fire department? And what is the role of streets department? Or what is the role of the health department? And it just makes sense that many eyes on the same problem can prevent some of the more serious cases of violation and then, therefore, catastrophe. So in that memorandum of understanding, I would obviously think that there would be a need for cross-training of key personnel, particularly the fire department and others that are out there, boots on the ground, as you said, in the community, that could be very helpful. And then describe for me, is there existing technology that can go to the same database that cross-checks, well, we came out there today, this is a health violation, and what is the lag time between that initial discovery and someone following up? So, I mean, I guess...
Well, I think probably the kind of technology the city already uses in 311. I mean, they have to sort complaints, figure out which department it should go to, provide some kind of follow-up. But I can't sit here right now and tell you what program...
I didn't expect you to be able to solve the problem right here, but it begs the question, handheld computers that are able to be linked to a database that gets us instant response. So if I'm out there in my passing and I look, was there an active permit on this? The other follow-up to that is subcontractors. You talked about almost a musical chairs, who's on first, subcontracting situation. Could you elaborate on that?
Well, I mean, the work is performed under the name of the contractor that applies for the permit. And then responsibility is delegated to other people who it is not easy to determine whether they are employees of the contractor or whether they're independent contractors. And that leads to a number of problems. It leads to difficulty enforcing safety regulations. It leads to problems enforcing revenue rules. I mean, this is an issue that I know I've heard Councilman Kenny talk about endlessly.
So, Mr. Controller,
and Councilman Heenan, for that matter, right?
Yeah. Did you have a chance to look at the mayor's executive order post the collapse of the building?
I saw the news reports that summarized the order.
Do you think they go far enough to address some of the needs to keep us safe?
I think that they are very comprehensive, and I do. The issue is going to be not what those regulations say on paper, but what is able to be accomplished by the number of people that are committed to that task, and whether there's adequate budget and an adequate number of people.
Thank you so much. Councilman Heenan?
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Controller, thank you for stopping by and presenting your testimony. I have had the firsthand experience in having many conversations over several years prior to being elected to city council dealing with unscrupulous contractors and how to basically have people play by the rules and abide by the law, which means, you're either a licensed contractor or a bona fide employee of a licensed contractor, and run into brick walls the entire time. So fast forward to from 6-7 years ago to now, present, have you seen some positive change in moving in a direction where, we are trying to come up with a process and systems where all people are accountable for?
No, I think unfortunately it's moved backwards. I mean, we've had, I think there were about $7 million in budget cuts in L&I in the past decade. So we already saw that they didn't have the resources to accomplish their mission in 2006, and there were major cutbacks in 2008. So it's largely a self-policing system. It's a self-policing system, or you wait for something to happen.
Well, I think, and I hope that, through this process and collaboration with your office, we're proactive in having processes and procedures in place, and I think that is the intent. I mean, I think the new L&I commissioner, Carlton Williams, he's done a fabulous job.
Well, I'll second that. I would say that Commissioner Williams has been extremely responsive and has been within his personal power of being able to affect things. He does get on these issues right away. He responds to problems the same day. I think he has been constrained by resources.
What's your frustration with twofold question? I'm sure there is some frustration with trying to when asked, certain information from the Department of Revenue and their collaboration with the Department of L&I. Has any of that changed, or does that continue to be somewhat of an issue trying to, when a tip or some information is brought to you, how does that hurt any of the audits that you perform?
I don't think it really has changed, but for what I just commented on, that we've had the ability to deal with L&I in the past year and get them where there's a serious issue to get right out there and do an inspection. But in terms of the regular sharing of information, I don't think there is a system in place to expedite that. I think
so we don't share. So that's I think a desperate need and a critical part of trying to stop behavior. With people who aren't paying taxes, to the city and not being able to track any kind of unscrupulous either contractor, owner, or developer, or worker that's on a job site. I mean,
correct.
Is that a correct assumption?
And I've always thought that these would be revenue generators. I mean, there are so many violations that the cost of the additional inspectors and enforcement could pay for itself. But there's, I think, also a philosophy that, almost like at the federal level, that deregulation is better, and that if these shackles are removed from business being able to self-police and do what they want, that there'll be a lot more economic activity. And I think what was brought home, very tragically here, is that what lies in the balance are human lives. This is not an abstract problem. Actually, my wife said if L&I inspectors were called something else, if they were called construction or housing police, people would get the point. I mean, you need police to proactively patrol, to control crime, to control violence. And the role that these people play is equally important.
No, they are truly first responders, being on site first and protecting the public in the construction and demolition, public safety concerns. You did a report, and your report was very well written, and the investigations and findings that you had working with
You're referring to last year.
last year's.
And even there, the frustration is, and we've talked about this, if people had badges indicating who's an employee and who's a subcontractor, it would make it easy, because a lot of we don't have direct enforcement power. We have to partner with L&I to try to do observation of enforcement action. So we do observation, we do audits.
So you don't have the authority.
We can't issue a citation, and
You don't have the authority, controller, to audit or investigate a particular job site or industry?
We can audit the city agencies that are responsible for enforcement, but for example, we can't show up at a work site and demand to be admitted to make an inspection. L&I can. They have the power to enforce the codes. So a lot of the work had to be performed on the basis of observation. So you could see that people weren't wearing helmets or weren't using safety equipment. You could see certain notorious open air violations, such as the failure to control dust and the failure to wet down the buildings and the closing off of streets without permits. But anything that would require close inspection, we would have been hampered at.
But your report, and you talked about, and it was at the same time as the piece of legislation that Councilman Kenny and myself and 17 members of this body voted on. You talked about the underground economy, and you had a small sampling, just a small sampling, that you investigated in certain parts of the city. I mean, do you think that it's a much larger underground economy that's out there than you just reported? I mean,
sure. I mean,
in my opinion, I believe you only touched it on the surface. That there is a larger scale and a lot more people who aren't paying taxes and who are not being accountable for here in the city that's performing work.
The way the system works now, there's a tremendous burden on the regulating agencies. I mean, you're talking about some workers that are getting paid under the table. There are always questions about allegations have been made that some of the workers are not citizens. It's not easy to determine that facially. You can't stop these people and say, can I see your driver's license? Can I see your identification? Can I see your pay stub? That's why we've been arguing for more and more obvious indicia of who these personnel are, so that the enforcement agencies can be helped in tracking it. There's an awful lot of, it wasn't me, it wasn't the contractor, it was somebody else, it's an independent contractor. Who are they? Which was the independent contractor who was on that day? I know your legislation has required the filing of additional information centrally. We think on these sites it would help if people had kind of a name tag or a badge, something that indicated what their connection was to the person with the permit, what their connection is to the person with the license.
I don't disagree with you. That's all I have.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Sanchez.
I just wanted more of a comment. I wanted to thank the controller for publicly saying sometimes in our quest to reduce the size of government for efficiency's sake, we make compromises and we make choices. And as Chair of L&I, I've always been extremely concerned about our ability to be more than just a code enforcement agency, but a public safety agency. And like you, I'm more confident in the leadership of our Commissioner Williams to get both of those things and to do both of those things. So I appreciate the fact that you say that, because I think if one thing the public has to hear in this very public discussion is that if we want to be more proactive and more preventive, we have to put the resources behind that. So I appreciate that. I did want to ask you one thing. So if you've seen the executive order, having done all these reports and seen the executive order of the mayor, is there anything that sticks out at you that is not included in that? And moving forward, will you be working with us to come up with some additional kind of steps, lessons learned through this process?
Well, I think the order does rely pretty heavily on requiring the contractor to provide certain kinds of reports. And of course, then the backup issue is to what extent are those reports being monitored? So there was commentary on the 22nd Street incident that the permit was filled in as being a job that was costing $10,000, and now there's an allegation that it was actually, I think, $122,000, although it should have been $250,000, and that immediately raises a red flag about did anybody notice that a project of this magnitude was being cited as costing only $10,000, and whether there was an attempt to evade graduated fee requirements or other revenue requirements. So the order does put a lot of responsibility on the owners and the contractors to get engineering reports and other, which will be a way of creating additional liability and responsibility if the owner doesn't do that, and it should prohibit the issuance of the permit. But the real test is going to be whether anybody reads all of those documents, whether you have enough people to, in fact, read all the documents that are being filed every day, or whether it's something that just gets filed on a shelf and is referred to when there's a tragedy. I would also like to commend Councilman Sanchez for being very outspoken on this for a very long time about the need for policing the collapse of infrastructure in the city. But as you recall, there was a tragic incident only a couple of years ago where a fire escape landing fell off a building in Center City and killed somebody. And at the time, promises were made that L&I was going to inspect every single private apartment building, at least in Center City, which had no basis in reality. They can't even get out to respond to complaints. They can't even get out to respond on a schedule that involves imminently dangerous. What is the possibility that there's going to be that there was? There's never been any indication that those inspections occurred. So you cannot have a reliance on the odds or statistics and say this only happens once every 600 days. I mean, government's responsibility is more proactive than that. We have a responsibility to protect people. We're not just, cannot just depend on being lucky.
Duly noted. I appreciate those comments because I think you're right, and I think one of the things that we want to be able to come out of this committee is with what are the benchmarks, who monitors the benchmarks, who polices the police to the best of our ability. And, you know, I do appreciate the council president's leadership in saying we're going to pull a report very quickly, work with the administration on ensuring that those resources are there, but ultimately the test will be in your audit in terms of ensuring that we're putting in those protocols. And that's why I welcome your input in this process, and as we delineate how prescriptive we want to be in all of this stuff, and then ultimately how do we monitor the accountability line. So we appreciate your input in this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Councilwoman Blackwell.
Thank you. I would like to thank the controller as well. There's so many areas that are of concern. I know I've been a constant critic of the brownouts with the fire department. And when we have people who are renting those properties that caught on fire, we had one in my area near Cedar Avenue where a young person died. And when the person who was renting it was low income, the building sits. So there are so many areas that we can focus on and talk about where we can try to make sure that people are protected. I see Tracy Gordon back there. She had a fire recently next door to her. So that's a whole big issue in and of itself. And I believe it's Councilman Kenny who has been talking about the input of the fire department. So there are many areas that we can work in to try to protect our city and its residents. Thank you again, Mr. Controller.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Are there any other questions for our witness? Seeing none, thank you so much, Mr. Controller, for taking the time out. Okay, so there are no other witnesses to testify today? Seeing none, hearing none, I want to thank all those who testified, but particularly the members of this committee, Councilwoman Sanchez, Councilman Heenan, Councilman Kenny, and Councilwoman Blackwell for their dedication to this issue. My only closing remarks will be that this is the first leg in a four-part relay, and this is to establish for the record where we are by way of L&I demolition. I would only say that New York, at the turn of the last century, had to go through a whole codification of fire codes and building codes when massive populations moved into urban areas. In order to alleviate ghettos, squalor, and fire hazards, they had to really codify their codes. When we had the pier collapse in early part of the last, we had to look at the popularity of our piers and whether they could be maintained for entertainment, and it took us a while to catch up to those kinds of codes. And I think as Philadelphia makes a resurgence economically, we got to remember that some of these properties built in the 30s and 40s were only meant to last 30, 40 years, and we are coming to the end of that period, and we need to be a lot more diligent about how we develop, how we demolish, and how we keep people safe. So having said that, we are going to recess the special committee on demolition to the call of the chair until June 27th, 2013 at 10 a.m. in these chambers. Thank you all very much.